Blood money buys loyalty, silences witnesses, and buries enemies. But Beryl Blackwood, the undisputed head of the most feared syndicate on the East Coast, was about to learn that all the illicit wealth in the world couldn't buy God's mercy. He paid a staggering $150 million to a shadow clinic to save his dying 5-year-old son, signing an ironclad contract that forbade him from seeing the boy for 6 agonizing months. But when a cryptic warning pushed him to break his own rules and breach the heavily guarded compound, Beryl stood behind a two-way mirror and felt the blood in his veins turn to ice. What he witnessed in that sterile, blindingly white room didn't just break his heart, it shattered his entire reality. To the FBI, the DEA, and the rival cartels operating out of the eastern seaboard, Beryl Blackwood was a ghost who cast a very long, very bloody shadow. At 38, he sat at the head of a criminal empire built on shipping logistics, offshore casinos, and a ruthless enforcement of loyalty. He was a man composed of cold calculation and tailored Italian wool. Men spoke his name in hushed, nervous tones in the back rooms of cigar lounges, from New York to Miami. He had ordered the dismantling of rival families without his pulse ever rising above arresting 60 beats per minute. But every fortress has a flaw in its masonry. For Beryl, that flaw was a 5-year-old boy named Leo. Leo was the spitting image of his mother, Catherine, who had bled out on an operating table under suspicious circumstances just hours after bringing him into the world. Beryl had burned down half the city, searching for the doctor responsible, only to find it was a genuine, cruel medical anomaly. Since that day, Leo had been Beryl's anchor to humanity. The boy was kept isolated in a sprawling, heavily fortified estate in upstate New York, guarded by heavily armed men who would gladly take a bullet for the kid. Then the bruising started. It began as faint, purple fingerprints on the boy's pale arms, followed by chronic fatigue that kept him bedridden. Within weeks, the nosebleeds started, sudden, violent, and difficult to stop. Beryl brought in the best pediatric hematologists in the world. He flew in specialists from Johns Hopkins and the Mayo Clinic, paying them obscene amounts of cash under the table to treat his son in the privacy of his mansion. The diagnosis was a death sentence, aplastic Fanconi anemia, variant type 4. It was a rare genetic mutation that caused the bone marrow to effectively shut down, deteriorating the body from the inside out. Dr. Alastair Sterling, a renowned geneticist who owed Beryl heavily for past gambling debts, stood in the mahogany-paneled study and delivered the crushing blow. "Beryl, I'm sorry. We can do blood transfusions. We can try aggressive immunosuppressive therapy. But the mutation is too aggressive. His organs will begin to fail. He has, at most, 8 months." For the first time in his life, the Don of the Blackwood family felt his knees threaten to buckle. He grabbed Dr. Sterling by the lapels of his white coat, slamming the 60-year-old man against the bookshelves. "You fix him. I don't care if you have to rip the marrow from my own bones without anesthesia. You fix him." "I can't," Sterling choked out, terrified. "No one in the legitimate medical world can. The FDA regulations, the clinical trial phases. It would take 10 years to develop a targeted gene therapy. You don't have 10 years. You don't even have a year." Beryl dropped the man, his chest heaving. "You said legitimate medical world. Tell me what exists in the illegitimate one." Sterling adjusted his collar, trembling. "There are rumors, whispers among the genomic elite. There is an off-the-books research facility operating somewhere in the Swiss Alps. They don't answer to the World Health Organization. They don't follow international medical ethics. They cater exclusively to the global ultra-rich, oligarchs, cartel heads, deposed royalty. The facility is called the Asclepius Institute. "Who runs it?" Beryl demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "Dr. Clara Hemington," Sterling replied. She was a prodigy at Oxford, MD and PhD by 24. She was leading a DARPA-funded genetic regeneration project until she was quietly dismissed for conducting illegal human trials. She vanished 5 years ago. They say she has achieved impossible things with CRISPR gene editing. But Beryl, her price is astronomical, and she plays by her own rules. Beryl didn't blink. "Get me a meeting." Locating Dr. Clara Hemington took 3 weeks of relentless digging by Beryl's top intelligence brokers. The meeting was set not in a hospital, but in a private, soundproofed room in the basement of a luxury hotel in Geneva, Switzerland. When Beryl walked in, flanked by his imposing right-hand man, Dominic, he expected to find a mad scientist. Instead, he found a woman who looked like she could freeze hell over with a single glance. Dr. Clara Hemington was in her early 30s, dressed in a sharp, slate-grey suit. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back into a severe twist, and her eyes, a striking, icy blue, met Beryl's dark, intimidating stare without a flinch. Beryl slid a thick medical dossier across the steel table. "My son, Leo, 5 years old." Clara didn't touch the file. She simply looked at him. "I already know everything about Leo's condition, Mr. Blackwood. Type 4 variant. Bone marrow failure. Spontaneous hemorrhaging. I also know that you are currently losing a turf war in New Jersey, which makes your operational liquidity slightly volatile. So before we discuss saving your son's life, let's understand the reality of this room." Beryl's jaw tightened. No one spoke to him like this. Dominic shifted, his hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket, but Beryl held up a finger, stopping him. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "You have my attention, Doctor. I have developed a proprietary viral vector that can rewrite the corrupted genetic sequence in Leo's hematopoietic stem cells," Clara stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "It is highly experimental, heavily volatile, and incredibly painful. The treatment protocol requires a complete restructuring of his immune system. But I can cure him." "How much?" Beryl asked. $150 million US, Clara said smoothly. "Half up front in untraceable cryptocurrency, the other half deposited in a blind trust upon his discharge." Beryl didn't bat an eye at the sum. It would bleed his reserves dry and force him to sell off 3 lucrative shipping ports, but it was just money. "Done. When do we fly him out?" "There is a second condition, Mr. Blackwood, and this one is non-negotiable." Clara finally leaned forward, mirroring his aggressive posture. The proximity sent a strange, unexpected jolt through Beryl. The woman smelled of antiseptic and cold winter air, an intoxicating mix of absolute control. The physiological stress of the cellular rewrite is monumental. The child's heart rate, cortisol levels, and adrenaline must be kept perfectly baseline. Any emotional spike, joy, fear, anxiety, can trigger a cytokine storm and kill him instantly. "Explain," Beryl demanded. "Once you hand Leo over to my facility, you walk away," Clara said, her blue eyes piercing his. "You do not visit. You do not call. You do not demand FaceTime. For 6 months, your son belongs to me. He will be kept in a medically induced twilight state for the first 8 weeks, followed by severe isolation protocols. If you, or any of your heavily armed associates, come within 5 miles of my institute and cause a disruption, the contract is void, and your son will die." Beryl felt a murderous rage flare in his chest. "You want me to hand over my only living blood to a stranger in a bunker and just walk away? I am Beryl Blackwood. I don't wait in the dark." "Then buy a child-sized coffin, Mr. Blackwood," Clara replied, completely unfazed, "because your ego cannot cure aplastic anemia." The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. Dominic looked ready to draw his weapon. Beryl stared into Clara's eyes, searching for a bluff, searching for fear. He found neither. What he saw was a brilliant, arrogant reflection of his own ruthless ambition. In that moment, an undeniable electric tension sparked between the Mafia Don and the rogue scientist. "If he dies on your watch," Beryl said, his voice a lethal promise, "there isn't a hole deep enough on this earth for you to hide." "If he dies," Clara said softly, "you won't have to look for me. I'll send you the coordinates." 3 days later, Beryl stood on a snowy tarmac in Zurich, holding his fragile, sleeping son. He pressed a kiss to Leo's feverish forehead, his chest tearing open from the inside out. He handed the boy to Clara's medical team, heavily guarded by ex-military mercenaries. Clara stood at the steps of the private medical jet. She gave Beryl a single, brief nod. Then, the doors closed, taking Beryl's heart with it. The first 3 months without Leo turned Beryl into a monster. To cope with the agonizing helplessness, he poured his rage into the syndicate. The streets of New York and New Jersey ran red as Beryl consolidated power with unprecedented brutality. He expanded his territories, crushed his rivals, and slept perhaps 3 hours a night. His underboss, Dominic, watched the Don's descent into paranoia with growing concern. Every Sunday at exactly 9 a.m., Beryl received an encrypted email from the Asclepius Institute. It contained dry, clinical data, white blood cell counts, hemoglobin levels, liver enzyme profiles. No photos, no audio recordings, just spreadsheets that showed slow, agonizingly incremental improvements. But by month 4, the data started feeling wrong. Beryl was not a doctor, but he was a man who survived by spotting inconsistencies. The timestamps on the lab reports were fluctuating. The medical jargon felt repetitive, almost copied and pasted. He called Dominic into his study one evening, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "Dominic, I want you to run an audit on the second 75 million we placed in the blind trust for Dr. Hemington. Just check the holding patterns." Dominic shifted uncomfortably. "Beryl, the terms of the escrow were clear. We don't touch it until the 6 months are up. Poking around those accounts could trigger the security protocols." "I didn't say touch it. I said look at it," Beryl growled. "Something is off." Unable to shake the gnawing sensation in his gut, Beryl bypassed his own crew and hired an independent contractor, a disgraced former MI6 cyber intelligence officer named Arthur Penhaligon. Beryl paid Arthur a fortune to dig into Dr. Clara Hemington's current operations without alerting her security network. A week later, Arthur sat across from Beryl, looking distinctly pale. "Mr. Blackwood, Asclepius isn't just a clinic, it's a fortress," Arthur said, sliding a tablet across the desk. "It's built into a hollowed-out mountain base, originally designed for Swiss military command. But that's not the alarming part." "Get to the point, Arthur." "I managed to intercept encrypted supply chain manifests for the facility," Arthur explained. "Dr. Hemington is ordering massive quantities of pediatric medical supplies, blood bags, IV lines, specialized nutritional paste. Mr. Blackwood, she's ordering enough supplies to sustain not just your son, but at least 30 children." Beryl frowned. "She caters to the elite. Maybe there are other sick kids." "Maybe," Arthur said cautiously. "But I also pulled the financial records of the blind trust you set up. The money hasn't just been sitting there. It's being leveraged. Someone on the inside of your organization provided the necessary authorization codes to allow Hemington's financial backers to use your $75 million as collateral for black market pharmaceutical purchases. Beryl's blood went cold. Only 2 people had those authorization codes, Beryl and Dominic. Before Beryl could process the betrayal, his burner phone, a device known only to 3 people in the world, vibrated. He picked it up. It was a text message from an unregistered, untraceable number. The datasheets are faked. Your son isn't being cured. He is being used. If you want him alive, you have 48 hours to reach sub-level 4. Beryl stared at the glowing screen, the words burning into his retinas. The careful, clinical trust he had placed in Clara Hemington evaporated, replaced by the violent, primal instinct of a father protecting his blood. He had given her $150 million. He had given her his son. And she had played him. Beryl stood up, the chair scraping violently against the hardwood floor. He walked over to the biometric safe built into the wall and pressed his thumb to the scanner. The heavy steel door hissed open, revealing an arsenal of customized tactical weaponry. He picked up a sleek, suppressed Heckler & Koch HK 416 assault rifle, checking the chamber with practiced, deadly precision. He hit the intercom button on his desk. "Victor, Carmine, get the strike team ready. We're flying to Switzerland tonight. And find Dominic, bind him, gag him, and throw him in the basement until I get back." "Boss?" Victor's voice cracked over the speaker, shocked. "To the Swiss clinic?" The contract is dead," Beryl said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, hollow calm. "And by tomorrow morning, anyone standing between me and my son will be too." The Swiss Alps at midnight were a graveyard of ice and jagged stone, howling with winds that could strip the heat from a man's body in minutes. Beryl Blackwood didn't feel the cold. Clad in snow camo tactical gear, his breath pluming in the freezing air, he stared down through thermal binoculars at the Asclepius Institute. From the surface, it looked like a high-end, brutalist ski lodge, all dark timber and reinforced glass. But Arthur's blueprints confirmed that the lodge was merely a capstone. The real facility plunged deep into the bedrock, 5 subterranean levels of state-of-the-art medical terror. "Victor," Beryl murmured over the secure comms link. "Status on the perimeter grid." "Cameras are looped, boss," Victor replied, his voice a tight whisper from the tree line 50 yards east. "Arthur's ghosted the motion sensors for exactly 4 minutes. We have a 60-second window to breach the ventilation shaft leading to the loading dock before the secondary biometric sweeps kick in." "Execute," Beryl ordered. He moved with the lethal, silent grace of a predator. Beryl, Victor, and Carmine rappelled down the sheer ice face, landing softly on the reinforced concrete of the loading dock. Carmine, a man whose expertise with explosive charges was rivaled only by his absolute loyalty to Beryl, attached a shaped thermal charge to the heavy steel door. A localized, blinding flash of magnesium later, the lock melted into slag. They slipped inside, instantly enveloped by the sterile, aggressively white corridors of the Institute. The air smelled of bleach, ozone, and secrets. Beryl's HK-416 was raised, his finger resting lightly on the trigger guard. He had ordered his men to use non-lethal tranq rounds on the medical staff, but to put live ammunition into anyone carrying a weapon. They bypassed the first 2 levels with terrifying efficiency, dropping 4 armed ex-military guards before the mercenaries even knew they were being hunted. But Beryl's mind wasn't on the tactical execution. It was on Leo. The text message burned in his mind. "He is being used." As they reached the heavy blast doors of sub-level 3, an automated voice echoed through the corridor. "Warning! Unauthorized breach detected in Sector 4. Lockdown protocols initiated. Thick steel shutters began to slam down from the ceiling. "Under the blast door! Now!" Beryl roared, sliding across the polished linoleum. Victor and Carmine barely rolled under the crushing weight of the steel before it sealed shut with a deafening boom. They were trapped in the stairwell, leading down to sub-level 4. The only way out was through the biometric security gate at the bottom of the stairs. Beryl stepped up to the retinal scanner. Arthur had warned him that the system was unhackable from the outside, but Beryl wasn't relying on code. He pulled out a heavy, specialized tungsten crowbar from his tactical rig, wedged it into the seam of the electronic lock housing, and violently ripped the panel from the wall. Sparks showered the dim stairwell as he severed the main data artery. The doors hissed, protesting, before manually disengaging. Beryl kicked the doors open, stepping into the shadows of sub-level 4. What he expected was a dungeon, a laboratory of horrors where his son was strapped to a table, drained of his blood. Instead, he found himself in a darkened observation corridor, looking through a massive, wall-length two-way mirror. And what he witnessed froze the blood in his veins. The room beyond the glass was not a surgical theater. It was a sprawling, brightly lit biosphere. Lush synthetic grass covered the floor. Artificial sunlight streamed from advanced full-spectrum LED panels on the ceiling. There were toys, structural playsets, and walls painted with vibrant, soaring murals of the sky. And there were children, at least 30 of them, of varying ages, running, laughing, and playing. Beryl dropped his rifle a fraction of an inch, his dark eyes wide with an emotion he hadn't felt in years. Profound, staggering shock. He pressed his gloved hand against the cold glass of the two-way mirror, his breath catching in his throat. There, sitting in the center of the artificial meadow, building a tower out of brightly colored blocks, was Leo. His son was no longer the frail, bruised ghost Beryl had handed over months ago. Leo's cheeks were flushed with a healthy, rosy color. His hair, which had been falling out, was growing back in thick, dark curls. He looked robust. He looked alive. But the scene grew even more surreal. Sitting on the grass next to Leo, wearing a simple white t-shirt and scrubs, her blonde hair falling loosely around her shoulders, was Dr. Clara Hemmington. The icy, untouchable scientist from the Geneva hotel room was gone. In her place was a woman looking at Leo with an expression of profound, maternal tenderness. She reached out, gently ruffling the boy's hair, and Leo laughed, a bright, ringing sound that bled through the intercom speakers and shattered the last of Beryl's icy exterior. "Boss?" Carmine whispered, stepping up behind Beryl, utterly bewildered. Is that the kid? He looks perfect." Beryl couldn't speak. The text message had said Leo was being used. It had said the data sheets were faked. The data sheets were faked, but not to hide Leo's deterioration. They were faked to hide his miraculous recovery. Before Beryl could process the massive paradigm shift, the door to the observation corridor hissed open at the far end. Clara stood there. She had left the playroom, sensing the breach. She held a suppressed 9mm pistol, leveled directly at Beryl's chest. Her icy blue eyes were blazing with a fury that rivaled Beryl's own. "You arrogant, predictable bastard!" Clara hissed, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. "I told you that if you breached this facility, you would kill him. You didn't just break the contract, Beryl. You just signed the death warrant for every child in this bunker." Beryl slowly lowered his rifle, raising his empty left hand. "Lower the gun, Clara. I saw the text. I know the money was leveraged. Tell me what the hell is going on here, or I will tear this mountain down around us." "The text?" Clara sneered, her grip on the pistol tightening. "You think I sent you a text? Beryl, you blind fool. Who do you think holds the patents to the suppression drugs your son would have taken for the rest of his short life? The pharmaceutical cartel makes billions keeping these kids sick. I didn't steal your money. I used it to fund a cure for all of them, and your underboss, Dominic, helped me do it." Beryl stepped forward, ignoring the gun pointed at his heart. The proximity between them was suddenly electric, the air thick with tension, betrayal, and a strange, undeniable magnetism. "Dominic betrayed me?" "Dominic's niece is the little girl in the wheelchair by the oak tree," Clara said, her voice cracking slightly as she gestured blindly toward the glass. "He knew you would never agree to fund an illegal sanctuary for 30 children. You only cared about your own blood. So we faked the escrow logs to buy the equipment needed to mass-produce the viral vector based on Leo's successful gene edit." Beryl stared down at her, the realization washing over him. The text message didn't come from Clara, and it didn't come from Dominic. "If you didn't send the text," Beryl said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "who told me to come to Sub-Level 4? The silence in the dimly lit observation corridor was absolute, broken only by the muffled, joyous laughter of the children playing on the other side of the two-way mirror. But on this side of the glass, the atmosphere was suffocating. Dr. Clara Hemington's hands trembled slightly, but the suppressed 9mm pistol she held was aimed with deadly, unwavering precision directly at the center of Beryl Blackwood's armored chest. Beryl stared down the barrel of the weapon, but his mind was struggling to process the monumental paradigm shift of the last 60 seconds. The text message on his encrypted burner phone had explicitly warned him that Leo was being used, that the medical data was faked, and that his son was in grave danger. It was the catalyst that had driven Beryl to tear through the Swiss Alps and breach a multi-million-dollar bunker. But looking through the glass at Leo, healthy, vibrant, with rosy cheeks and thick curls, laughing as he stacked brightly colored blocks, Beryl realized the terrifying extent of the deception. The datasheets were faked, but not to conceal a deteriorating corpse. They were meticulously fabricated to hide a breathtaking, absolute medical miracle. "You didn't send the text," Beryl said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. The pieces of the puzzle were shifting, aligning into a picture that filled him with a cold, creeping dread. "And Dominic didn't send it." "Why would we?" Clara hissed, her icy blue eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and furious indignation. "Dominic's niece is the little girl in the wheelchair by the synthetic oak tree. She has the same Type 4 variant as your son. He knew you, Beryl. He knew you were a ruthless, self-serving monster who would never agree to fund an illegal sanctuary for 30 dying children. You only cared about your own bloodline. So we used your blind trust. We faked the escrow logs to purchase the black market pharmaceutical synthesizers required to mass-produce the viral vector based on Leo's successful gene edit." Beryl didn't move. He absorbed the insult, the judgment, and the profound revelation of his underboss's betrayal. In his world, Dominic's actions warranted a bullet to the back of the head. But Beryl was a father first. He looked back through the glass at the little girl in the wheelchair, clapping her hands as Leo knocked his block tower over. Dominic hadn't betrayed the syndicate for power or money. He had done it for blood. It was a motivation Beryl not only understood, but respected on a primal level. The pharmaceutical cartels own the patents to the suppression drugs these children would have been forced to take for the rest of their short, miserable lives, Clara continued, her voice cracking with fierce, maternal emotion. They make billions keeping them sick. They don't want a cure. I didn't steal your money, Beryl. I used it to wage a war against an industry that profits off dying kids. And now, because of your colossal arrogance, because you breached my perimeter and triggered the external alarms, you've exposed us. You just signed the death warrant for every child in this bunker." Beryl slowly lowered his HK-416 assault rifle, letting it hang from its tactical sling. He raised his empty left hand in a placating gesture, completely ignoring the gun pointed at his heart. He reached into his tactical vest, pulled out the sleek, black burner phone, and tossed it onto the floor between them. It skittered across the polished linoleum, stopping at the toes of Clara's pristine white sneakers. "Pick it up," Beryl commanded, his tone shifting from an angry father to the cold, calculating don of the East Coast. "Read the message." Clara kept the pistol leveled at him, but glanced down at the illuminated screen, her brow furrowed in deep confusion as she read the untraceable text. "The datasheets are faked. Your son isn't being cured. He is being used. If you want him alive, you have 48 hours to reach sub-level 4. "I didn't send this," Clara breathed, the anger in her eyes suddenly replaced by genuine horror. "Nobody outside of my financial backers and Dominic knows the layout of this facility. Nobody knows sub-level 4 exists." "Someone does," Beryl said, the realization settling heavily in his chest. "Someone who was tracking my offshore money. Someone who needed me to panic, bypass your external biometric grid, and open the front door for them." The words hung in the sterile air for only a fraction of a second before the answer arrived in the form of absolute, world-shattering violence. A massive, concussive explosion rocked the foundation of the Asclepius Institute. The sheer kinetic force of the blast was staggering, traveling through the subterranean bedrock and violently heaving the floor beneath their feet. The deafening roar of detonating C4 echoed down the elevator shafts, a sound Beryl was intimately, dreadfully familiar with. The blast threw Clara violently backward. She screamed, dropping the pistol as she fell. Beryl's combat instincts, honed by decades of cartel warfare, overrode his shock instantly. In a blur of motion, he lunged forward, grabbing Clara by the waist and pulling her tight against his heavily armored chest. He twisted his body, absorbing her impact as they crashed to the floor, shielding her with his Kevlar vest from the shower of shattered ceiling tiles and drywall dust that rained down upon them. For a terrifying, disorienting moment, the world went entirely black. Then, the emergency backup generators kicked in. The harsh, fluorescent white lights of the Institute were dead, instantly replaced by the ominous, pulsing crimson glare of the emergency strobes. A synthesized, automated female voice began to blare overhead, cutting through the ringing in their ears. "Warning. Critical structural failure detected in Sector 1. Hostile breach in progress. Lethal countermeasures disabled." Beryl lay on the floor, the heavy dust settling over them. Beneath him, Clara was trembling violently. Her hands gripped the tough tactical fabric of his chest rig, her face buried against his collarbone. The proximity was electric, a sudden, intense collision of two entirely different worlds. He could smell the clean, sharp scent of her antiseptic soap, mixed with the raw, metallic tang of vaporized cordite. "Are you hit?" Beryl barked, his voice rough as he pushed himself up slightly, his dark eyes rapidly scanning the ruined corridor for immediate threats. No, Clara stammered, coughing as she inhaled the drywall dust. "What was that? Who is attacking us?" Beryl helped her to her feet, his mind racing through tactical permutations. "The Rossi family," he said, the venom in his voice palpable. "They're a rival syndicate I've been dismantling in New Jersey. They suddenly stopped fighting back on the streets a month ago. I thought they were retreating. They weren't. They were tracking my money." "But why?" Clara asked, panicking as she looked at the two-way mirror. Inside the playroom, the blast had caused the artificial sunlight panels to flicker and die, replaced by the same terrifying red emergency lights. The children were screaming, huddling together in terror. Why would a Mafia family care about a pediatric clinic? Because they aren't just a Mafia family, Clara. They run one of the largest black market pharmaceutical rings on the eastern seaboard, Beryl explained rapidly, pulling his HK-416 back up to a firing position. They followed the money from my blind trust. They found this place. They don't just want to execute me and my heir to win a turf war. They want your research, a proprietary, unpatented gene therapy that cures fatal mutations. That is a multi-billion-dollar medical breakthrough. They're going to kill everyone in this mountain, steal your physical data servers, and sell the viral vector to the highest bidder. The text message was bait. It was a meticulously crafted psychological operation designed to trigger Beryl's paternal panic. The Rosses knew Beryl would tear through the heavy external security doors of the Institute to get to his son, effectively clearing the path for their own heavily armed strike team to walk right in behind him. "Boss!" Victor's voice crackled frantically over Beryl's encrypted earpiece, barely audible over the blaring alarms. Beryl tapped his comms unit. "Report, Victor. Give me eyes." "We have heavy company, boss!" Victor shouted. From his position down the hall, the sharp crack of Carmine's M4 carbine echoed loudly, confirming contact. Thermal scanners are picking up at least a dozen heat signatures, fast roping down the main freight elevator shafts in Sector 2. They're wearing heavy tactical gear, ballistic visors, plate carriers. They're carrying heavy ordnance, boss, shotguns and thermite charges. They're pushing straight towards the playroom. Beryl's jaw tightened. The cold, calculating Mafia Don vanished, entirely consumed by the terrifying, primal rage of a father defending his bloodline. "Victor! Carmine! Fall back to the Sector 4 choke point," Beryl ordered, his voice dropping to a terrifying, hollow calm that sent a shiver down Clara's spine. "Do not let them breach this corridor. Engage with extreme prejudice." Beryl turned to Clara. The icy, untouchable scientist was gone, replaced by a terrified woman realizing she was standing in the epicenter of a mob war. But underneath the fear, Beryl saw the same fierce, protective fire in her blue eyes that burned in his own soul. "The playroom," Beryl said, stepping closer to her, his physical presence dominating the narrow, flashing red hallway. "Can you seal it from the inside?" "Yes," Clara breathed, her chest heaving. "There's a reinforced titanium vault door. It's designed to withstand a direct blast. But the hydraulic cycle takes 3 minutes to completely seal shut. Beryl, if they have thermite, they'll cut through the outer doors in seconds. They'll slaughter the children before the vault cycles." "They have to go through me first," Beryl said smoothly. An absolutely terrifying, lethal smile curved his lips. It was the smile of the devil of the East Coast, the man who had built an empire on blood and fear. Clara stared at him, the profound realization washing over her. The ruthless monster she had despised for months, the man she had stolen from, was now the only thing standing between her life's work and total annihilation. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a shield. Beryl reached out. Amidst the blaring sirens, the choking dust and the impending violence, he performed a shockingly tender gesture. His rough, calloused thumb gently brushed a streak of soot from Clara's pale cheek. "Go to my son," Beryl commanded softly, his dark eyes locking onto hers, holding her gaze with an intense, magnetic weight. "Get inside that vault. Initiate the lockdown. Do not come out until I tell you to." "Beryl," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "There are too many of them." "I brought you an empire of medical miracles, Dr. Hemington," Beryl replied, turning his back to her and stepping into the center of the corridor. He drew his twin customized Sig Sauer pistols from his hip holsters with a metallic snick, checking the chambers with a fluid, deadly grace. "Now, let me do what I do best." Clara didn't argue. She nodded once, a tear cutting a clean line down her dusty cheek. She turned and sprinted toward the heavy access door leading into the biosphere playroom, her white coat billowing behind her. Beryl stood alone in the corridor, the red emergency lights painting his armored figure in blood-red strobes. At the far end of the hallway, the heavy steel doors began to hiss and bubble, turning a blinding, incandescent orange as the Rossi mercenaries applied their thermite breaching charges. Beryl Blackwood raised his weapons. He had paid $150 million to cure his son. Now, he was prepared to pay the final, bloody price to keep him alive. The reinforced steel of the Sector 4 corridor door didn't just melt, it screamed. A blinding, incandescent orange glow began to trace the edges of the heavy locking mechanism, eating through the high-grade titanium like acid through paper. The thermite charge the Rossi Syndicate had planted was military-grade, burning at over 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The air in the subterranean level grew instantly, suffocatingly thick. The sterile, bleach-clean scent of the Asclepius Institute was entirely swallowed by the acrid, choking stench of vaporized metal, sulfur, and burning wiring. Beryl Blackwood stood perfectly still in the center of the pristine white hallway. To anyone else, the deafening blare of the red emergency sirens and the apocalyptic heat radiating from the dying door would have induced blind panic. But Beryl's heart rate was a steady, terrifyingly calm 70 beats per minute. His breathing was measured, rising and falling in a rhythmic tempo as his dark eyes locked onto the glowing seam of the blast door. He held his twin customized Sig Sauer P226 pistols raised, the tritium night sights perfectly aligned. 10 yards behind him, the massive, foot-thick hydraulic vault door leading to the playroom was slowly, agonizingly slowly, beginning its closing cycle. 3 minutes, boss, Victor muttered. He was crouched behind a heavy, overturned stainless steel medical centrifuge, his eyes glued to a cracked thermal imaging tablet. That's the cycle time. 3 minutes until the locking bolts secure Clara and the kids inside. Then we buy them 3 minutes and 1 second, Beryl replied, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that barely carried over the mechanical screeching of the melting steel. Check your corners, Carmine. They're going to flood the choke point. Carmine slapped a fresh 30-round magazine into his customized M4 carbine, pulling the charging handle with a sharp, metallic clack. He wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, smearing a streak of black soot across his cheek. I got the right flank, boss. Nobody touches that vault. With a deafening, concussive crack that shook the dust from the ceiling tiles, the door finally gave way. It didn't just fall, it blew inward, propelled by a secondary breaching charge. A shockwave of heat, twisted metal, and blinding white smoke violently blasted into the corridor. Immediately, the smoke was pierced by the sharp, rhythmic thwack, thwack, thwack of suppressed automatic weapon fire. The Rossi mercenaries poured through the breach like water from a ruptured dam. They were professionals, clad in heavy, matte black tactical gear, their faces hidden behind reinforced ballistic visors. Beryl didn't flinch. He didn't seek cover. He squeezed both triggers simultaneously. His movements were a blur of lethal, practiced precision. The recoil of the Sig Sauers was absorbed entirely by his forearms. He fired double taps, aiming high to bypass the mercenaries' heavy chest plates. The first 2 men through the door dropped instantly, their ballistic visors shattering into spiderwebs of cracked polycarbonate as Beryl's hollow point rounds found their marks. Suppressing fire! Pin them in the funnel! Beryl roared, stepping smoothly to his left to avoid a volley of return fire that chewed the plaster wall behind him into jagged craters. Victor and Carmine unleashed a relentless hail of lead down the corridor. The deafening roar of Carmine's unsuppressed M4 filled the enclosed space, effectively pinning the advancing Rossi squad behind the smoking, twisted wreckage of the doorway. The pristine white walls of the Asclepius Institute were suddenly painted with the brutal, unforgiving reality of Beryl Blackwood's world. Plaster exploded into clouds of chalky dust. Overhead, fluorescent tubes shattered in showers of sparks, plunging half the hallway into strobing, chaotic darkness. "Push up! Push the line!" A harsh, arrogant voice barked from the thick smoke. Stepping into the fray, kicking aside the body of one of his own fallen men, was Dante Rossi. The vicious, hot-headed underboss of the rival family didn't bother with a visor. His dark hair was slicked back, and his face was twisted into a cruel, adrenaline-fueled sneer. He carried a customized, short-barreled Benelli M4 tactical shotgun, sweeping it toward Beryl's position. "Blackwood is mine!" Dante screamed over the gunfire. "Take the vault, get the doctor!" Following Dante's command, two heavily armored mercenaries broke from the cover of the ruined doorway, sprinting desperately down the right flank, directly toward the heavy vault door that was currently only halfway shut. Through the narrowing gap, Beryl could see Clara. She was frantically punching override codes into a wall-mounted terminal, her face pale with absolute terror, her hands shaking violently. "Carmine, the right flank! Drop them!" Beryl yelled, ejecting his spent magazines and seamlessly sliding two fresh ones into the grips of his pistols in under a second. Carmine pivoted out from behind his barricade, leveling his rifle at the sprinting mercenaries. But in doing so, he exposed his chest and shoulder. Dante Rossi didn't miss the opening. Dante swung the Benelli M4 and pulled the trigger. The thunderous boom of the 12-gauge buckshot echoed through the corridor. The blast caught Carmine high in the right shoulder, the kinetic force lifting the heavy-set enforcer completely off his feet and spinning him violently into the blood-spattered wall. Carmine went down hard, a sickening crunch echoing as his collarbone shattered. His rifle clattered uselessly across the slick linoleum floor. "Carmine's down!" Victor shouted, laying down a desperate line of covering fire that forced Dante to duck back behind the steel frame of the doorway. But the two sprinting mercenaries were already past Victor's line of sight. They were 10 yards from the vault, then 8 yards, 5. Beryl knew the math. The hydraulic hinges were too slow. In less than 4 seconds, the mercenaries would breach the gap, and Clara and his son would be dead. The cold, calculating Mafia Don vanished. In his place was a father driven by a primal, apocalyptic rage. Beryl dropped his empty right pistol, letting it clatter to the floor. In a single fluid motion, he drew a 6-inch tactical combat knife from the sheath on his chest rig. He didn't take cover. He sprinted directly into the open corridor, intercepting the line of fire. He moved with a terrifying, predatory speed that defied his large frame. He tackled the first mercenary just 3 yards from the vault gap. Beryl drove his knee into the man's sternum, using the momentum to plunge the combat knife cleanly through the vulnerable, unarmored seam beneath the man's armpit. The second mercenary skidded to a halt, raising his submachine gun. Using the falling, dying man as a human shield, Beryl absorbed the incoming fire. 2 heavy 9mm rounds slammed into Beryl's Kevlar vest. The kinetic impact was like being struck by a sledgehammer. It cracked 2 of his ribs instantly, driving the breath from his lungs in a sharp hiss. But Beryl didn't stop moving. He shoved the dead weight of the human shield forward, knocking the second mercenary off balance. Raising his left hand, Beryl pressed the barrel of his remaining Sig Sauer directly against the visor of the second mercenary and pulled the trigger twice. The man crumpled to the floor, lifeless. Beryl spun around, his chest heaving, blood dripping from a laceration on his cheek. He looked over his shoulder. Through the remaining 2-foot gap of the closing vault, Clara was staring at him. Her icy blue eyes were wide, filled with tears and a profound, shocking realization of what this ruthless man had just sacrificed for her. "Beryl!" she screamed, reaching a hand out toward the gap. "Stay back," Beryl commanded, his voice rough. With a final, heavy hydraulic thud, the massive steel door slammed shut. The heavy locking bolts engaged with a series of deep, mechanical clicks. The children were safe. Clara was safe. But Beryl was out in the open, his ribs screaming in agony, his left pistol clicking empty. And Dante Rossi was smiling. Dante racked a fresh shell into the chamber of his Benelli shotgun with a slow, deliberate pump. The remaining 4 Rossi mercenaries fanned out, their weapons trained squarely on Beryl and the pinned victor. "Well, well, well," Dante sneered, stepping over the debris and closing the distance. He kept the shotgun aimed directly at Beryl's heavily bruised chest. "I gotta admit, Beryl, I heard the rumors, but I didn't believe them. The ghost of the East Coast, the Don of the Blackwood Empire, playing nursemaid to a bunch of dying runts. You've gone soft." Beryl stood tall, refusing to show the agonizing pain radiating from his ribs. He let the empty pistol fall from his hand, his dark eyes locking onto Dante with an expression of cold, impenetrable amusement. "My father sends his regards, by the way," Dante continued, gloating as he stopped 5 feet away. "Don Roberto has been waiting a long time to take the Newark shipping lanes from you. When we realized you were bleeding your accounts dry to fund some Swiss science project, we couldn't believe our luck. We're taking the doctor, we're taking the gene therapy patents, and we're leaving you in a body bag." Beryl stared down the cavernous barrel of the shotgun. "You made one critical miscalculation, Dante." Dante barked a laugh. "Yeah. What's that? You're out of bullets. Your boy Carmine is bleeding out, and you have nowhere to run." "You assumed," Beryl said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, absolute whisper, "that I brought my whole crew down the stairs." For a split second, Dante frowned, confusion flashing across his arrogant features. Suddenly, a massive, mechanical groan echoed from the far end of the corridor. The reinforced steel doors of the main freight elevator shaft, which Arthur Penhaligon had supposedly locked down, began to buckle inward. With a violent, screeching tear of metal, the doors were violently pried apart by the heavy steel jaws of a hydraulic rescue spreader. Stepping through the ruined elevator doors, the heavy jaws of life falling to the floor with a crash, was Dominic. Dominic's face was bruised and cut from where Beryl's men had initially detained him in the upstate New York basement, but his eyes were blazing with absolute, unyielding loyalty. And he was not alone. Pouring out of the shaft behind him were 14 of the Blackwood Syndicate's most elite, heavily armed enforcers, all carrying customized automatic weapons equipped with laser sights. Dozens of red laser dots instantly painted Dante's chest and the foreheads of the remaining Rossi mercenaries. Dominic racked the slide of his own combat shotgun, leveling it directly at Dante's spine. "Drop it, Rossi," Dominic growled, his voice echoing in the sudden, tense silence of the corridor. "Or they'll be sweeping you up with a sponge." Dante froze. The color rapidly drained from his face as he realized he was entirely surrounded, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. The remaining Rossi mercenaries didn't hesitate. They slowly lowered their weapons, the fight instantly draining out of them as they raised their hands in surrender. Beryl walked slowly toward Dante. The younger man was trembling now. Beryl reached out and casually ripped the Benelli shotgun from Dante's grasp, tossing it clattering to the floor, inches off the ground, pinning him inches off the ground, pinning him violently against the blood-spattered wall. Tell your father, Beryl whispered, his face inches from Dante's, his breath hot and laced with absolute venom, that the Blackwood family is no longer just in the shipping and casino business. We deal in life and death now. Dante gagged, his hands clawing uselessly at Beryl's iron grip. If a single Rossi soldier even looks at a map of Switzerland again, Beryl continued, his voice a lethal promise that left absolutely no room for negotiation. If I catch even a whisper of your father's name near my offshore accounts, I won't just kill his men, I will hunt down every cousin, every uncle, every nephew in your syndicate, and I will erase your entire bloodline from the face of the earth. Do you understand me? Dante, choking, his eyes bulging with genuine terror, nodded frantically. Beryl released his grip, letting Dante collapse to the floor, gasping for air. Take their weapons and throw them out in the snow, Beryl ordered his men, not sparing Dante another glance. He turned to Victor, who was already applying a pressure dressing to Carmine's shattered shoulder. Get Carmine to the medical bay upstairs. Prep the jet. Beryl then looked at his underboss. Dominic stood tall, waiting for judgment. He had betrayed Beryl's trust to fund the clinic, but he had just saved his life. Dominic, Beryl said, the adrenaline finally beginning to crash, leaving him exhausted, but victorious. Yeah, boss, Dominic replied cautiously. Good job on the elevator, Beryl said softly. Now, we have a lot to talk about regarding your niece. If you found yourself holding your breath during Beryl and Clara's explosive fight for survival, you are not alone. This story proves that the deepest devotion can be found in the darkest of places, and sometimes the most ruthless villains are the only ones capable of pulling off a miracle. What did you think of Dominic's shocking betrayal and his true motives? Did you expect the Rossi Syndicate to crash the Institute, or were you hoping for Beryl and Clara to team up from the start? Let me know your favorite twist in the comments below. If you want more intense, high-stakes Mafia romance dramas filled with breathtaking suspense, tactical action, and fierce loyalty. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends who love a good thriller, and subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next gripping story.